Unarmed conflict, aerial bombings, systematic ethnocide, civil unrest, persecution, or any other forms of violent action threaten a region, its residents are often forced from their homes. And once they leave, they become refugees, fleeing from their land in search of a safe haven. The impact on children is enormous and takes a physical, psychological, and social toll on every child refugee. Refugees often find initial respite in refugee camps. These may be located within the borders of their own country or just across the border in a neighboring country. But these camps may host anywhere from 1,000 to nearly 500,000 people, and with them come a host of problems. Refugee camps are intended as temporary settlements and are designed to meet basic human needs for only a short time. Sleeping quarters are usually tents, and toilets and washing areas are shared by hundreds or thousands of individuals. Basic food and medical supplies are dependent on donor governments, but primarily come from humanitarian agencies. And there are no jobs and often no schools for the children. The future for refugees in camps is uncertain. Some refugees are returned to their home countries, but others may spend years and sometimes decades in a camp. Others, trying to escape the violence, tearing apart their homes, give their savings to human smugglers who transport them to the shores of a more promising future, only to end up in detention centers. And then there are some who become quota refugees. About 17 countries around the world accept quota refugees. How many make it to a country where the future holds some promise? Less than 0.25% of the world's refugees make it to a resettlement country. This year, the global refugee number passed 50 million people, and half of these 50 million refugees are children. So what happens to the child refugee in these circumstances? First, there are the dangers and horrors of flight itself, leading most children to associate the word refugee with violence and death. Then come the camps themselves. They are overcrowded, freedom of movement is limited, and epidemics such as measles, dysentery, meningitis, and cholera are major killers. Children are inevitably exposed to a subnutritional diet, and consequently, children's development is permanently affected by this prolonged state of malnutrition. Rationed water makes it difficult to maintain personal hygiene or wash clothes, leading to outbreaks of scabies and lice. And the refugee child's psychological well-being is severely compromised. Refugee children often become passive, dependent, and unquestioning. Children in refugee camps or detention centers often suffer from isolation and loneliness as well. Their families have been broken apart and many arrive as orphans. Not only do they have difficulties adjusting to the lack of community or extended family support that they're used to, they often have to deal with family role reversals, where they might have to take over as head of the family or must act as interpreters and cultural brokers. Children grow up in conditions which do not permit the socialization according to the values of their own cultures. And finally, being in a refugee camp is no guarantee that children are free from atrocities and harm. The worst threat in many camps that refugee children face is that of forcible recruitment into the armies of guerrilla fighters. What can we do? New Zealand's refugee quota is 750 individuals a year, and it has not changed in over 25 years, this number. Furthermore, in the last 10 years, New Zealand has not met this quota once. So we can petition the government to minimally meet this annual quota, and also push for an increase in the annual quota, which we can certainly handle, and with an increase in funding to support refugee services. What else can we do? We can petition and write letters to end the practice of quarreling refugees in detention centers where conditions are harsh and often inadequate, and asylum seekers are detained on a mandatory and indefinite basis without an individual assessment or possibility for review. This amounts to arbitrary detention, which of course is inconsistent with international human rights law. Just your writing a letter or adding your signature to a petition can make a difference. 25 million refugee children don't have a voice.